Okay, welcome back to my channel, Made Between the Pages. My name is Taylor, and today we're going to be doing my February wrap-up. I read 11 books in February, which is, proud of myself. Honestly, some of these were manga, which counts, absolutely count, but it makes it easier to get your body count up, if you want to put it that way. But I did read 11 books, and I'm very proud of myself. I was able to finish a couple books that I had like hanging over me, like I really wanted to finish, and I got some of those done, which I'm so happy. I don't know if you guys know that feeling, but when you finally read those books that have been on your TBR just like staring at you, you know, for a long time, when you finally read those, it's just feels so good, so accomplished. There were a couple other books by Black authors that I wanted to get to this month, as that's kind of the priority over BookTube in February, although it should be a priority always. I know that we're talking about it a lot in February for Black History Month, but a lot of the books that I had wanted to read didn't come in from my library. The hold was like too long, so I wasn't able to get my hands on them by the end of February. So if you look at my March TBR, some of those will be rolled over that I had on my February TBR. But I did get to a couple of the ones that were on that list, so that makes me really happy. The first one that I read is actually How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi. This book has been recommended and really put out there a lot recently, and I do think that there's a good reason for it. This book pulls no punches about the state of the United States right now and where we're at when it comes to racist policies and how those affect, everyday lives of Black people and people of color, but specifically Black people. And I think he does a really good job of putting it out there from different perspectives. So whether you're a person who connects to macro scale discussions or micro scale discussions and more personal anecdotes, he has both of those. So what he'll do is he'll take a macro scale problem such as gerrymandering or voter suppression, and he'll talk about it on that macro scale and the political scope and how our policies uphold this big system. But then he'll take that big scale problem and he'll scale it down to the micro scale and give you a personal example of how it's affected his life or someone he knows. And he gives you both of these applications. So I think that no matter what type of reader you are or how you connect to ideas and people, there's a way to connect to the ideas he's trying to say in this book. And I loved how he continuously did that throughout the entire book. The other thing I really enjoyed, I guess enjoyed isn't the right word, but the thing I really struck me about this book was the discussion of what being an anti-racist is. So you're either a racist or an anti-racist, and there is no kind of middle ground between those two. But when I say, or when Ibram X. Kendi says you are a racist or you are an anti-racist, he's talking about your actions. So it's not a personality trait, being a racist or an anti-racist. It is a description of your actions as a person. It's a dynamic state, not a static one. So you can change from day to day which group you're in based on the actions that you choose to take. So are you actively, choosing to go against racist policy, or are you passively, allowing that system to exist? And those actions are what define which group you're in. So I think that this way of thinking was fresh for me, in that it's a constant reminder that you have to continuously work to undo systems. It's not, okay, I did a couple things to help out this cause and I'm good, my box is checked. That's not exactly what this is about. And I think that this book does a really good job putting it in that perspective, and how the actions that you take define you day to day. I think that this way of thinking is really good for me because it reminds me not to become lazy, not to become complacent, and to continue to, fight the good fight. I definitely want to buy a physical copy of this for myself because I think I want to reread it every couple of years. As humans, we can only focus on, so many specific policy issues at once. If we try to tackle them all at once, it's going to be overwhelming. So I think it would be good to pull out sections of this, I think I can do something here, I think I can do something here over the years. And I think this book would be really good for helping to focus that kind of goal for me personally. I forgot to give a rating, but I think it's pretty obvious. I gave this book 5 stars. Now, after reading How to Be an Anti-Racist, I was inspired to pick up Rising Out of Hatred. I forget who this is written by, the actual author, Eli something. I'll put it up on the screen. So he interviewed and wrote this book about Derek Black. And Derek Black is the godson of David Duke. I don't remember Derek's dad's name, but, you know, basically his father and David Duke were like the modern face of the KKK, as most people know, at least about David Duke. So Derek was brought up in white supremacy from the get. Like, this is what he was entrenched in. And he did like radio shows espousing these views, and he was not shy about it. And because he has such strong convictions about this, when he expressed interest in going to a more liberal college where people did not hold those bigoted views, his dad was like, go ahead. If anyone changes, it'll be the people around you. And then this is the story about how Derek got where he is today, which is out of white supremacy. He has, you know, separated himself from those views, and he actively speaks against them now. And this is the story about how that happened. Obviously, I'm not going to talk much more about it because I don't want to give the book away, but after reading How to Be an Anti-Racist and seeing, you know, the macro and micro scale, this book called out to me personally because I wanted to see a personal journey of someone going from one camp to another and how that happened. And like I said, I don't want to give much away, but the ending is not a spoiler. You know he gets out of it, right? And a lot of what gets him out of it is love. That's cheesy, but love and people who cared enough to tell him he was wrong, but to listen to him on a human level, like to see him as a human who is flawed, not as a vessel for these, you know, views, to see him as a dynamic human, and have hope for him to change. And I don't know, I thought that story is just, it's something that I really needed to hear, I think, after reading How to Be an Anti-Racist, because it gave me another perspective on how to possibly reach people who are on that other side. Because, you know, I think most of us, if you haven't, I'm very happy for you, but I think most of us have encountered someone, somewhere, who has expressed ideas like that. And you always wonder, what can I do? And I think, you know, some people can't be reached and you can't spend all your time trying to do that. But I do think that this book gave me hope, because if Derek can change, some kid who was, you know, born essentially into this, that gives me hope that other people can too. I ended up giving this book 4 stars. It was a little dry at places. I was doing it via audiobook, so I was able, you know, to push through that. But that was more like writing style that wasn't so enjoyable. But the content itself, I think, is really valuable, and I would definitely recommend this book. Now, the next book here, I wanted to love this book so much. I really, truly did. And I don't think that I'm gonna, you know, say I'm never gonna finish this book, but it ended up being a DNF, and that is These Violent Delights. This book had a lot of hype about it, and a lot of people that I share tastes with really loved this book. And so I went into it like, yes, this is gonna be amazing. But I spent 2 full days struggling to keep any interest in the book itself. I would pick it up and read a couple pages and then, you know, just, you know, squirrel, you know, go after something else. I would do that constantly. And it just got exhausting trying to pull myself back to this book every time. And that's not what reading should be, you know, it should be pulling you in and of itself. So I don't know if I just wasn't in the right mindset. I don't think I hated it or anything. It just couldn't keep my attention. There were a couple points where the writing seemed a bit overly pretentious to me, but you know, I mean, that's usually not a deal breaker for me. Writing style, unless it's real in your face, usually is not a factor that much of a factor for me. So I don't think that was the main reason, but something about this book just couldn't capture me. So I ended up DNFing it at about, I think it was 20 to 30%. So, I mean, like I said, I'm open to picking it up in the future. Maybe I'll give it a shot later, but this is a soft DNF for now because it just wasn't grabbing me. Next book I read was Across the Green Grass Fields by Shauna Maguire. This is the 5th, 6th? Editing Taylor will figure that out and put it on the screen. This is a continuation of the Wayward Children series, which is a series of little novellas about children who go through doors to magical worlds. Think, you know, Narnia or Alice in Wonderland. And they enter a world that's like perfect for them. But then through circumstances, they all end up having to come back to our world. And each little novella follows the story of a different child or group of children, either when they initially went through the door, going back through their door, or trying to adjust to being back in our world. And I adore this series. I will read every book that's in it, I think. But I have found that the later books are missing something, some little pinch of magic that were in the first, like, 3 or 4 books. I still really love them and they still sweep me away, but I don't know, there's some little magical element that's missing, because with the first couple books, they I was thinking about them for days and I wanted to, you know, experience them again right after I finished them. But for this book and Come Tumbling Down, there is a book in between, I think, or it was before that. Yeah. So the last 2 books, Come Tumbling Down and then this one, Across the Green Grass Fields, didn't have that come back kind of pull for me. But while I was, you know, immersed in the world, it was just as transformative. So Shauna Maguire's writing is still beautiful. What I like to do with these books the first time is experience them via audiobook. I listen on 2 times speed usually, so the audiobooks are only 4 hours, so if you cut that in half, it's about 2 hours. So I like to just put my headphones in and just take a long walk and just completely be in the world. And this last one was essentially a horse world, so unicorns, centaurs, you know, you name it, it existed, along with other creatures as well. And I think that as someone who was a horse lover when I was young, it was it hit that nostalgic note for me pretty well. So when I was taking a walk, you know, going through the woods, it was very transformative. So I ended up giving this book 4 stars because I enjoyed it while I was there. But it doesn't, like I said, have that reflective nature for me, so it wasn't quite 5 stars. Okay, these next 5 books are a shoujo manga series. I got sick for a couple days halfway through February, so I was in bed, and for me, I can't really pick up big, thick fantasies when I'm sick. It just doesn't match my reading mood. So I tend to gravitate towards manga when I'm not feeling very well. So I was just kind of on my phone and I found Happy Hustle High is the name of this this series. I found it for free online and I was like, oh my god, this is a blast from the past. I loved this series when I was younger. I think in early high school. And the author, Rie Takeda, I believe that's her name, I loved a lot of her work. So I was really interested to see what I would think of this series jumping back in. The first 2 books were as charming as I remember. It has a lot of the tropes that I love in shoujo manga, so like a boisterous, kind of tomboyish main girl character and a kind of standoffish guy. So those are 2 tropes that I really enjoy interplaying together, and it was just lots of fun. It was a riot for the first 2 books, but then the 3rd, 4th, and 5th book got a little strange, lazy, I don't know. It's like the author knew what tropes the reader was expecting and then lazily did them, or did them in really weird ways where I was like, this is kind of jarring, this is not working for me, or this is too much. So, and then the ending was just, because the later books weren't very good, the ending was cheesy, which is fine for, you know, shoujo manga, for it to be cheesy, like bring it on. But it wasn't satisfying because half the journey wasn't that good. So I think for me, the first 2 books are like 4.5 stars. The third book is 2 stars. The fourth one is also 2.5, because there's one scene that's really cute. And then the last book is like a 3, because like I said, the ending is cheesy, but yeah, you know. So it kind of fizzled out at the end, which was upsetting. But the beginning was a riot and I loved it. So would I recommend it? I guess. It's a quick read. I read all 5 in one day, just laying in bed, you know, dying, reading it. So, you know, it's a quick read, so have at it if you want to. The next book I read is definitely my favorite from this month, and that is Grown by Tiffany D. Jackson. I've seen people rave about this book, and I did have it kind of on my radar to pick up, but when a lot of my holds were taking a long time, I decided to look for other stuff that was available, and this book was available. So I picked it up, and oh my god, this book damn near had me crying my eyes out in a public setting on the bus. Like, it was, wow, the writing was incredible, and I felt these main characters struggle so much that I'm pretty sure my face, like when there was a difficult part happening in the book, I'm pretty sure I scrunched my face like I was gonna cry, you know, like, oh, you know, like on the bus. Pretty sure I was doing that, maybe complete with the noise, because I was so into this book. This book is about a young Black teenager named Enchanted, who has a beautiful singing voice, and so she wants to become a singer. And when we start the book, she's 17. Her parents kind of want to support her dream, but at the same time want her to pursue other options, so she has other plans. But at one point, she goes to a singing competition and is kind of scouted by this superstar. And he kind of targets her, and they start their relationship, I guess you could call it, from there. And this definitely has parallels to R. Kelly and the situation that was exposed, or I guess was known for a long time, then finally the top was blown off of it in recent years. And this book deals with power dynamics, abuse of power, misogyny. It really talks about these issues in depth. And it's painful to read because you have seen this in your life, I'm sure. Whether, again, we've talked about macro and micro in this wrap up a lot, but whether you've seen it on macro scale or micro scale, you have seen these power dynamics at play. And it's terrifying not only in the incredible way that Jackson writes it, but also in its stark recognition. It's not surprising, it's sickening what happens in this book, but it's not surprising. And I think being confronted with that as a reader is just, it's heavy, but it's necessary. And I think that Jackson does a really good job of balancing that heaviness and that horror of what happens with the spark of hope that she inserts into the book, and the strength of Enchanted and her family. I think this book and the truth that it entails is a way of holding truth to power and putting it out in the light, even though it's ugly and no one wants to look at it. I think that it's necessary. So this book was amazing. I am now obsessed with Tiffany D. Jackson's writing, and I want to read everything that she's put out. So you'll be seeing more books from her on this channel, because this book blew me away, and I loved it. I loved it so much. Obviously, this book was 5 stars. All right, these last 2 are some of the books that I mentioned that I had like staring at me from my shelves for a while and that I finally tackled. And the first one is The Kingdom of Liars by Nick Martell. Now, I haven't really had this kind of showing on my channel recently, but I bought this last year. It was a cover buy combined with some other people that I trust or I have same taste as enjoying it, and it seemed kind of like an underrated possible gold mine. And so I bought it before I read it. And guys, I so wanted to love this book. I really, oh God, I wanted to. But I ended up giving it 2 stars. I have a vlog of me reading this that I'm hoping to put up on my channel in the next, couple weeks, so look out for that. But it had such potential. I think if I could have one word to describe this book, it would be potential. This is set in a world where the moon is broken. So, or there's 2 moons, and one of them is broken. And pieces of the moon fall down to Earth, kind of like meteors, and they have this alarm system, like, or moon coming, incoming, I'm sure it's much more dramatic than that, but that is part of this world building. And when the moon lands, some people say that it speaks a truth or a prophecy. Some people want it to, make weapons or whatever. So it's very valuable. So that's part of this world setup. The other is that magic costs memories in this book. There's all types of magic. There's elemental magic, dark magic, light magic. It depends on the person, what power they have. And then if you're not trained, or even if you are trained, if you use large amounts of magic, it will take your memories. It'll erase your memories. And you can become something called a forgotten. Basically someone who doesn't remember who they are or their family or anything. So I love high-cost magic systems. So I was all in for this book. Oh, and also the main character, he is the son of the man who supposedly, or was convicted of killing the current king's son, like 10-year-old son. And Michael, the main character, wants to save his family's legacy. Sounds awesome. Yeah, the application just wasn't there for me. Michael's last name is Kingman. You will never forget that, because they make sure to tell you every 3 to 4 pages that he's a Kingman. He really, really wants you to know that, and he's really afraid of you forgetting it. So they will remind you so often in this book. I started counting how many times Kingman was mentioned unnecessarily. If it's in like a conversation or it makes sense, I didn't do it. But all of these purple tabs are when Kingman is mentioned unnecessarily. It just doesn't need to be there, but they decide to remind you of it. Also, I hate Michael. I hate him so much. I think you're supposed to dislike him, but I don't think you're supposed to hate him on the level that I do. He starts off the book as like a spoiled brat, essentially. Not necessarily a spoiled brat, but a brat who expects the world to revolve around him. And that does give him the space for a lot of emotional growth. I can see why an author would do that. But it takes probably, I would say, this long for said emotional growth to happen. So you're just stuck with him for about 400 pages, just being a brat. And he makes so many bad decisions. But this is an example for me of those bad decisions making the book not good, rather than someone like Tao from Rage of Dragons. He makes bad decisions all the time, and he's also a one-track mind kind of character, but his decisions match the setting and the world and the plot. In this case, it just felt like we were just being derailed constantly by his bad choices, and I just did not enjoy that journey whatsoever. Also, the world building and the magic system were not very deeply developed. Like the moon that I mentioned, right? You want to find out more about that, I would assume, as I did. But it's mentioned kind of in the beginning of the book quite often, but then it kind of disappears, and it has no effect on anything else in the second half of the book. So for me, I'm like, what's the point? I know this is going to be a series, and that's fine. So maybe it'll come up later in the series. But for me, if you're going to make this a big part of the world building in the beginning, it needs to be significant within the story for me. Also, the magic system, we still don't really know how it works, and this is something I realize is a specific thing for me reading. So for someone who doesn't mind not fully understanding a magic system, having it be more soft and ethereal almost, something that, you can't quite put your finger on, if you like that, you could really like the magic in this book. But for me, I like to delve into it and find out bits and pieces throughout. And for me, it wasn't deep enough. It wasn't well developed enough for my reading tastes. So that aspect of it also kind of disappointed me. There were also some plot twists that didn't make sense for me. There's a character that I really, really like who's kind of this like more sassy, can't quite trust him, mentor kind of character. And it's okay to make that trip different, of course, but I was hoping for his final form, I guess, like how he is at the end of the book, to be a bit more satisfying. His particular plot twist didn't really work for me. But the rest of the end of this book was the saving grace that ended up giving this I think I gave it 2.5, 2 or 2.5 stars. And that was because the end of this book, we finally get that character growth. It finally just suddenly pops its head up and, we see the fruits of our 400-page labor. The character growth happens, and a lot of characters who before were just bystanders get brought in and brought into play, and these characters seem really interesting to me. And I want to see how those characters do in the future. So even though I gave this book a low rating, I'm not saying I'm not going to read the rest of the series, because I think that the second book in the series has the potential to be what I hoped this book was, with more developed characters and characters who kind of know what they're about and know what their goal is and can kind of move through the world with a bit more purpose. So I think that since that potential is there, I would pick up the second book in the series if I got my hands on it. But overall, this book just really fell flat for me, and that was really disappointing. It is still beautiful, though. I mean, look at that. Still obsessed with that cover. And the last book here, I technically finished it on March 1st, but we do what we want on our own channel, so this is being included in February, damn it. And that is The Name of the Wind! We did it! Almost an exact year after I started this book on my channel, I have finally finished it. For those of you who don't know, I have something on my channel called the Retro Reads BookTube Challenge, where I read backlist books from over 5 years ago. And this was one of the books in that cup. And this is like a fantasy juggernaut. People love this book. And it's something that if you are an epic fantasy reader, most people have read this. So I'm quite behind on this review and reading it, but I'm considering doing an individual review for it, honestly, but we'll see. But I'll talk about some of my thoughts here. I ended up giving this book 3.5 stars. So for me, this book is like one big epic fantasy hug. It's just a warm hug of a book for fantasy readers, epic fantasy readers. It's got all of the tropes that most of us enjoy. So it's got, the rags to riches hero, it's got a school setting, it's got a main character who breaks all the rules and somehow ends up staying in said school. It's got, taverns with roaring fires and live music and good drinks. It's got adventures with, battling gigantic creatures. So it has all of the tropes. But I think that the delivery was nothing new. Our main character, Kvothe, who I also do not like, I don't hate him as much as Michael from Kingdom of Liars, but he's not my favorite. He is good at absolutely everything. So, like, whenever they're like, oh, this is going to be difficult, he's going to do it in, like, half the time it's expected. Like, surprised Pikachu face, the 5th time that it happens. So he's good at absolutely everything. So that means that when something comes up, like a conflict, I never felt any kind of stress or worry because I knew that his galaxy brain was going to get him out of the situation, or largely unscathed. So because of that, I never felt there were any stakes. I never entered a conflict worrying for our characters or wondering what was going to happen. I just kind of was like, he's fighting this thing now. Wonder how he's going to win this one, right? So it was lacking some of that, spice, honestly, for me. So while I did enjoy this book, it wasn't anything new and it wasn't anything super exciting. Also, another thing that annoyed me about Kvothe is he is literally 15 in this book, going to a university, and all of his, he ends up making friends in, taverns and other places outside of the university, and all of these people are, 30, and they're having these conversations with him like he's 30, like he's their equal, talking about women and alcohol and, life experiences with this 15-year-old. I don't care how difficult your life has been or how much of a prodigy you are at music or whatever, a 30-year-old man is not going to sit down with a 15-year-old, drink an entire bottle of wine with them and be like, yeah, you know, man, women. Like, that's not going to happen. And so those aspects of this book, I was like, come on, you know? But I do think that some of that was on purpose because we are getting this book from Kuvos' perspective. So maybe he felt like he was having that camaraderie, but he wasn't quite from the other person's perspective. I don't know. But those situations still really annoyed me. There isn't much plot in this book to speak of. Things do happen, but it's, you know, more of a university, you know, magic school book. So it's a lot of learning and kind of leveling up. And I love that. So I had no problem with that. But when they did finally go on their grand adventure, I did find that a little disappointing. Wasn't quite the climactic situation I had hoped it would have been. But, you know, it wasn't bad. The one thing I really loved about this book was Denna, who is the love interest. That is not a spoiler. It just, there's no subtlety to that aspect of this book. She is the love interest. And I really like her. She is cruel. She is very self-serving. And she's accepted in that way. It's very refreshing to see a female character who's rough around the edges not have to change to be part of the hero's story. She's just part of the hero's story as she is. And that was refreshing. I really liked that. I know some people don't like the way, I've heard people don't like the way Kvoth treats Denna, but I loved that. I thought that that aspect of the book was one of the shining points of it. And I really liked Denna herself. I wish I saw more of that in like traditional setting fantasies, honestly. So yeah, I think that this book was just a middle of the road. It was a 3.5 for me. I could see why people really like it. It's a cozy read, like I said. But it just didn't have the qualities that are necessary for me to be a favorite. That concludes my February wrap-up. Finally, I have been filming for way longer than I planned to, so hopefully I can edit this down to not be so very long. But I had some surprising reactions to my reads this month. The ones that I thought would be favorites weren't, and the ones that I thought would be so-so were favorites. So that's kind of nice to have a twist there. So let me know in the comments down below if you've read any of these before, what you think of them. The usual. I'd love to chat with you guys. But for now, I'm gonna head out. Jane!